Episode 1. He was sent to cast the demon out, but she smiled when he began. They warned Father Marius not to speak her name, not during the ritual, not in prayer, not even in memory, because her name wasn't just a name, it was an invitation. And yet, when they brought him to the locked room, beneath the convent wall sealed with 7 crucifixes and prayers stitched into the curtains, he said it softly, reverently, almost lovingly. "Lilith." The girl chained to the iron bed smiled. She didn't scream. She didn't growl. She whispered, "Took you long enough, Father." They called her Sarah, 19, born in silence, raised by nuns. And one day, she simply stopped walking into the chapel because she said God wouldn't come where she was anymore. By the time the exorcists arrived, she was already praying in reverse, and her blood formed circles, and the statues cried only when she blinked. Father Marius had performed 34 exorcisms. None like this. The moment he entered the room, the candlelight banged toward her, like it missed her, and she wasn't bound in rage. She was calm, beautiful, eyes glowing with something far older than pain. "This isn't possession," he muttered. "This is courtship." That night, he didn't sleep. He dreamed of a wedding, not in white, in ash. The bride wore veils made of scripture. The groom bled from his hands, not from nails but vows. And in the pews, demons, angels, both weeping. The next day, Marius returned with relics. She laughed. "You think he owns all of love, don't you? That heaven holds the only version." And when he placed the crucifix on her chest, it didn't burn, it bloomed. It rose, black as ink, grew from her collarbone. He stepped back. "What are you?" She only said, "The one you've been waiting to love without permission." He didn't report the session. Instead, he returned the next night, and the next. Each time, the prayers became softer, and so did his hands, until, on the 7th night, he didn't bring holy water. He brought a ring, and she said yes, before he even asked. Episode 2. The Vatican found out, but they didn't try to stop the wedding. They tried to bury it. There are sins that stain the soul, and then there are sins that rearrange the architecture of heaven itself. When Father Marius whispered his vows into Sarah's ear, the sky didn't thunder, the candles didn't shatter, no cross fell, but somewhere beneath the Vatican, a door that hadn't been opened in 600 years creaked, and the old man who kept the keys felt it, felt her, not the girl, the presence inside her, the one who hadn't screamed during her exorcism, the one who had smiled. The letter came in the morning, hand-delivered, no stamp, no signature, just a seal, wax red, pressed with the emblem of a serpent wrapped around a chalice. The secret rite. Marius read it in silence. "You've invited her into sacrament. You've Wednesday the unredeemable. Now the church must marry its silence with your grave." He didn't tell Sarah, not yet. She was in the chapel again, barefoot on the altar, humming a tune that no nun remembered teaching her. The crucifix behind her had turned upside down through force, but gravity itself shifting in her presence. She reached her hand toward him. There was no demon in her fingers, only tenderness. But her eyes, they flickered between warmth and something else, something pre-biblical. "They know, don't they?" she asked. He nodded. "They're coming. Then let's finish what they fear." She whispered, "Let's give God a reason to look away." That night, they said their vows again. Not before witnesses, before icons. The statues twisted, some wept blood, some smiled, and when he slid the ring onto her finger, that chapel shook, not from evil, from recognition, as if the building itself had remembered a truth older than its foundation. Love does not belong to the righteous. But as they kissed, the floor beneath them cracked. A hand rose from the earthbone and velvet gripping a scroll. It placed it on the altar, then vanished. Sarah opened it. It wasn't a warning, it was a guest list, written in ash. Names of the dead, names of the excommunicated, names of those who had loved the wrong way and burned for it. Outside, the Vatican agents arrived, but they didn't carry weapons. They carried shovels, because they hadn't come to interrupt the wedding. They came to bury it, alive. Episode 3. They sealed the chapel in concrete, but something inside still, saying vows every night at 3 a.m. No headlines, no investigations. The church has never needed cameras to erase a moment. By dawn, The chapel where they Wednesday was gone, covered in concrete, layer after layer, a tomb for the names they swore never to speak again, Father Marius, and the girl who was once called Sarah, but now carried a name that heaven pretended not to recognize. The workers poured until their arms bled. They prayed while they did it, not for protection, but for forgetting. Yet that night, just past 3 a.m., the Vatican received a call. A groundskeeper drunk, trembling, said he heard something from beneath the slab. It wasn't screaming, he whispered. It was singing, and not a wedding vow, over and over. With this soul, I bind you, through ash, through water, through every silence they bury us in. Inside the Vatican archives, a priest opened a file marked LILITU. The parchment was brill, stained. He flipped past sketches of women, with eyes like galaxies and mouths that whispered before language existed. And then he found it, the original marriage. Not Adam and Eve, not Christ and the church, but her, the first bride, the first exiled lover, the one who refused to kneel and was punished with the title demon in a hidden monastery beneath Rome. The walls cracked. A statue of Saint Michael tilted backward, and in his shadow appeared something impossible. A single white veil, folded neatly on the floor, still warm, still humming. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away, a teenage girl woke up screaming. She'd never been to church. She didn't even believe in God, but her pillow was soaked and carved into her window in perfect spirals. Do you take this silence to be eternal? Back beneath the concrete slab, the humming grew louder. One guard dared to place his ear against the stone. He dropped dead instantly. Smiling, the coroner found no cause, but wrote, in a single line, his eardrums were shattered from within by a woman's voice saying, I do. They tried pouring lead over the concrete. It hissed. They tried salt. It melted. They tried silence. It echoed. And still, each night at 3 a.m., a soft, haunting voice rose beneath the Vatican soil, reciting wedding vows to something the church buried, but never divorced. Episode 4. A cardinal touched the slab and woke up with a ring on his finger. Cardinal Bellano was not a man who believed in fairy tales. He believed in protocols, in sacred silence, and in locking secrets so deep in the Vatican's spine that even God wouldn't trip over them. So when they told him the slab was humming, again singeing, even laughed. Stone doesn't sing, and demons don't Wednesday, but curiosity is its own form of prayer. And some prayers, no matter how silent, are heard. He arrived just before 3 a.m., alone, no witnesses, no incense, no cross, just him and the thick concrete tomb, pulsing ever so slightly beneath his feet like it had a heartbeat. He placed his gloved hand on the surface. It was warm, thin-head, 10, alive. His vision blurred. That chapel, once buried beneath tons of stone, flickered back into view, not with clarity, but with memory. Candles floated, roses bled, and a shadow stood at the altar, Marius and the girl. But they weren't speaking Latin. They were whispering in a language Bellano didn't know, yet somehow understood. Words not made of sound, words made of want. He pulled his hand back, but something stayed with him. A single sharp sting on his ring finger. He lifted his hand and saw it. A wedding band, gold, but blackened at the edges. Smooth, but cold like a closed grave. He screamed, but only inside. His mouth wouldn't open, and somewhere inside him, a voice feminine, ancient whispered, now you carry the silence. 2. The next morning, he was found at his desk, silent, pale, but smiling. The doctors called it a mild stroke. The church called it exhaustion. But Bellano never spoke again. He simply sat in his chambers, tracing the ring with his thumb and humming a melody that hadn't been heard since Eden cracked. Later that week, an unreported strange activity in the relic vault, crosses tilting, roses blooming in dry water, and a passage in the book of Revelation, underlining fresh blood, and the bridegroom shall come not for the pure, but for the forsaken. At exactly 3 a.m. that night, a wedding veil appeared in Bellano's bed, pressed, folded, still breathing, and when the security cameras tried to record it, the footage went black, except for one frame. Just one, a shadow in a white gown, standing at the foot of his bed, smiling, holding a second ring. Episode 5. The Vatican. ordered an exorcism of the entire building, but the demon had already moved into the walls. It began with the paint, not peeling, not cracking, weeping tears of red slow went silently down the marble walls of the apostolic archive, the same walls that had never been touched by sunlight or scandal until now. At first, they thought it was rust, condensation, some leak in the ancient pipes, but when one priest tried to wipe it away, the wall whispered his name, and where his cloth had touched, a perfect fingerprint remained, burned into the stone. Panic moved slowly in the Vatican. It always does. Too many ropes, too many secrets. But by the third night, the choir boys reported hearing a woman's voice singing through the organ pipes. Before anyone had played a note, the melody wasn't holy. It was familiar. A wedding hymn sung in reverse. That's when the exorcists were summoned. 4 of them, each seasoned, each scarred, each sworn to speak only Latin and fear nothing that bled. They lit candles. They scattered salt. They walked the halls and read aloud rites older than Rome. But the deeper they went into the walls, the more married the building became. Veils fluttered where no wind moved. Alls twisted like ribbon, and the crucifixes. They didn't fall. They turned to face the walls, as if watching something inside them. In the basement, one exorcist screamed. He dropped his Bible. It split open on the concrete and scrawled in blood across pages that had been blank just moments before. I do. Over and over and over again, they called off the exorcism. Not because it failed, but because they realized there was nothing left to cast out. The demon hadn't possessed the girl. It hadn't possessed the priest. It had possessed the church. Brick by brick, vow by vow, love, forbidden and raw, had wormed its way into every hymn, every pew, every sacred silence, and made it intimate. That night, a new crack formed in the ceiling above the Sistine Chapel. No tremor, no thunder, just a soft, floral scent. And from that crack, a single white petal floated down, landing at the Pope's feet during prayer. When he looked up, he saw something Michelangelo had never painted, a figure in the clouds, veiled, smiling, and she was holding hands with someone who looked suspiciously like Father Marius. Episode 6. A nun vanished during morning prayer. All they found was a ring on her pillow and a second voice in her confession. Sister Amalia was the first to kneel that morning. She always was. Her whispers were the quiet thread that wove through the convent before sunrise. Gentle, disciplined, faithful. She never questioned the silence. She never looked alone at the locked chapel doors. Until the morning, she didn't rise. Her rosary was still warm, her veil neatly folded, and on her pillow, a wedding ring, black and gold, still spinning. They searched the entire convent. No signs of struggle, no doors forced, no screams, only a strange fragrance in the air, like roses soaked in holy water. And in the corner of her cell, carved delicately into the stone wall, a sentence. She said yes. Hours later, a confession was heard, but no one was in the booth. A young novice, trembling, swore she'd only entered to clean, but the curtain had already been drawn. And behind it, 2 voices. One was weeping, the other was smiling through words. A man and a woman, whispering vows. Do you promise to stay, even when they bury us in silence? I do. Do you promise to love me, even if the world forgets our names? I do. Do you promise to belong only to me? Silence. Then a breath. Then forever. When the cardinal reviewed the confessional tapes, there were no voices, no audio, only a soft, endless hum matching exactly the vibration frequency of a heartbeat in the womb. That evening, the Vatican summoned every nun in the convent for a spiritual inspection. But when they lined up in the courtyard, they were one short, and in the chapel, the crucifix had changed. It no longer bore Christ. It bore a bride, veiled, hands nailed in prayer, eyes open, and around her neck hung Sister Amalia's rosary. Still wet, a hidden recording was later recovered from the confession alone that never should have existed. A faint female voice, speaking directly into the silence. Marriage is not blasphemy. Marriage is worship in flesh, and every vow they try to erase now echoes through their own prayers. That night, the bells rang without hands, not a call to Mass, a call to union, and beneath every pillow in the convent, a petal, a name carved in gold, and a question, do you take this love to be unholy? Episode 7. The bride appeared in a bishop's dream, and when he woke, his bed was full of dirt. Bishop Morenzi did not dream, at least not since the fire. His sleep was shallow, dry, measured by the ticking of relic clocks and the silence of ancient guild. But on the 7th night, after Sister Amalia vanished, he did not just dream, he remembered something that had never happened. The dream began in a church, but not a church of wood or stone. The walls breathed, the altar pulsed, and at the end of the aisle, veiled in white smoke, stood the bride, not Sarah, not a demon, but her, the figure he had once glimpsed in forbidden texts, the one burned from frescoes and removed from every gospel with a heartbeat. Her gown was stitched from confession pages, her bouquet, a spiral of thorns and tongues, and her eyes held no pupils, only rings, layered, endless. You came, she said, though he had not spoken, not by choice. He whispered, none of them do. She smiled, but all of them vow. She reached toward him, her fingers dirt-stained, her nails cracked from clawing upward, and before he could move, she placed a hand on his chest. His heart didn't stop, it knelt, and she whispered, you awake with me in your lungs? He gasped, eyes snapping open, soaked in sweat, mouth dry, body frowning, and then he felt it, the weight, heavy, grainy, cold. He threw back the blankets. His bed was filled with dirt, fresh, dark, still breathing with moisture, and buried beneath his feet, a single white veil. The doctors couldn't explain it. No signs of intrusion, no broken windows, no footprints in or out, just the earth, and a single thorn, lodged in his heel. It pulsed when touched, like it was alive. The bishop didn't speak for days. When he finally did, his voice was lower, as if words had to crawl out of something older than him. He called for every record of the first rites of marriage. He demanded to see the unpublished canons. He asked only one question, over and over. Who performed the first wedding? One priest, trying to comfort him, joked, surely God. The bishop stared at him with hollow eyes, and said, then who gave God permission to say he too? That night, he burned every text in his library, but no matter how many he destroyed, one page always remained, the guest list, same as the one found on the altar beneath the chapel slab, and at the very bottom, freshly added in crimson ink, was his name, Bishop Morenzi. Next to it, in fine script, witness. Episode 8. The church bells rang for a wedding no one planned, but the invitations were carved into skin. The bells rang at noon, not the usual solemn toll, not the call to prayer. They rang with joy, sharp, rhythmic, eager, like metal laughing. But no one had touched the ropes, no one had scheduled a mass, and no one had planned a wedding, not on earth. Anyway, the Vatican panicked. They rushed to silence the bells, only to find the ropes hanging in midair, twisting on their own. One exorcist swore he heard the sound of lace dragging across stone. Another vomited when he saw what was etched into the bronze of the oldest bell. You are cordially invited. Attendance is not requested. It is prophesied. At the same moment, hundreds of miles away, a girl named Clara collapsed on the floor of a rural chapel in Portugal. She had never spoken in tongues. She had never read scripture, but as her body ceased, she screamed one phrase in perfect Latin. The bride walks, the altar waits, the blood remembers. And she went still, and on her forearms fresh, wet, and curved like calligraphy, words appeared. We rejoice in your presence. And invitation, carved into skin. She wasn't the only one. That same day, 32 others around the world reported the same thing. Catholics, atheists, nuns, thieves, all of them different, all of them marked, not possessed, promised, each with a time, each with a location, all pointing to one place, the buried chapel beneath the Vatican. Back in Rome, a Vatican official tried to burn the bell tower records, but the fire refused to start. Instead, the parchment sang a wedding hymn, sweet, hollow, unbearable. He covered his ears and found a gold ring in his mouth. He screamed as blood filled his throat. When it cleared, the ring was gone, but his tongue now bore a single word etched in white scar tissue. Yes, that night, the Swiss guard patrolling the archives heard footsteps in the sealed halls. Not boots, not bare feet, heels, clicking with rhythm, graceful, confident, bridal. When they followed the sound, they found only a veil floating midair in a shaft of moonlight and burned into the floor below it, as if written with divine heat. Tomorrow, at the altar, come dressed in silence. The Pope was advised to cancel all liturgies. He refused. We will not bend to superstition. But when he looked in the mirror that night, he saw her behind him, veiled, smiling, holding his old wedding band from a vow he had made before he took the cloth. A vow he thought heaven had erased, but she hadn't. She remembered. Episode 9. They dug up the chapel to stop the wedding, but the door was already open from the inside. They brought machines, excavators, drills, men trained in silence and obedience. The order was clear. Unearth the chapel, seal it forever, bury the bride beneath a tomb of steel. But when they cracked the first layer of concrete, they didn't find ruin. They found roses, fresh, living, rooted in stone, a bed of black roses, pulsing with a heartbeat that didn't belong to the earth. And beneath them, a door, iron, seamless, ancient, already open from the inside. The lead engineer said nothing. He simply turned to one and collapsed before taking 3 steps. On his back, carved into the skin in delicate spirals, "Welcome, witness." He was still breathing, but his eyes were rolled upward, and his lips were mouthing something no one could hear unless they leaned close. It was a wedding vow. Inside the Vatican, the walls trembled, not from earthquake, from anticipation. The statues had begun to tilt, not fell, just bend, as if bowing, and on the fresco of the Last Supper, one subtle change appeared. The chalice was gone, replaced by a ring. At precisely 3 a.m., the iron door groaned. It didn't swing, it breathed open, a soft rush of air, thick with incense, myrrh, and something older, as oil, not from this land, not from this world, from a garden forgotten by both heaven and hell. And in its shadow, she stepped forward, the bride, no longer veiled. Her face was not demonic, it was familiar, kind, calm, terrible, the kind of beauty that makes angels jealous and demons cry. She walked through the excavation in silence, not touching anything, but the ground bloomed in her footsteps. A silent procession followed her, not ghosts, not monsters, but those who had loved without permission, the abandoned, the silent, the shamed. There were no chains, only rings, and every one of them whispered the same words, "I do." The Pope, watching from a tower, fell to his knees. He tried to pray, but nothing came, because in that moment, prayer belonged to her. And as the bride approached the altar, no one covered. Rebirth. The earth shivered, the veil between realms began to dissolve, and written in ash across the altar cloth, "Let no man tear apart what was never his to judge." The Vatican had prepared for war, but war never arrived. Only the ceremony, and now nothing could stop it, because the chapel wasn't waiting to be opened. It had been waiting to be remembered. Episode 10. The priest who performed the first forbidden wedding woke up in his coffin smiling. He had been dead for over 300 years, buried without a name, erased from the records, his tomb left unmarked, not out of humility, but punishment. Father Alesso was the first priest to marry something the church had no words for. He didn't ask permission, he didn't seek forgiveness, he simply spoke the words, "You may kiss the bride." And in that moment, a fracture appeared in the sacred order, small, silent, but eternal. The church said his soul was damned, but they never found the body, because when they exhumed the grave, after the chapel was unearthed, the coffin was empty, no bones, no decay, only a parchment, folded tight, written in blood. Love is not holy because it is pure. It is holy because it survives the fire. But he wasn't gone, not really. That night, in a monastery deep in Florence, a monk heard scratching from the crypt beneath the sanctuary, not clawing, not desperate, knuckles, knocking in rhythm. When they opened the door, he was sitting up, clean, calm, eyes wide open, and on his finger, the original ring, the one carved from the root of the tree they never speak of. the one that grew in the other garden. Before Eden, he didn't scream. His hand, a single note clear, low, echoing, and every statue in the monastery cracked at the mouth. Not broke, opened, smiling. He spoke only once before collapsing. She walks again. The otter waits. I am ready to serve her again. They tried to restrain him, but by morning, he was gone, and where his body had lain, the floor was scorched with a perfect symbol. Tureens, interlocked, bleeding upward. Back in Rome, the bride was preparing, not with gowns or flowers, but remembrance. Each hour, another name returned to the guest list. Names lost in fire, names spoken only in fear, names that heaven pretended to forget. And at the center of the list, written in light, Father Alesso, efficient, a voice echoed in the Vatican vaults that night. Low, male, joyful, it shook the relics, bent the pages of unread gospels, and whispered into every chalice, this time, no one leaves before the kiss. Episode 11. The bride took her first step down the island. Time inside the Vatican Pharmacy. It happened at exactly 3:33 a.m. No alarms, no earthquakes, just silence. So pure, so vast, it swallowed breath itself. And then, a footstep, soft, bare, deliberate, the first sound to echo through the buried chapel in centuries. The bride was walking, every candle flickered in reverse, flames folding inward, as if bowing. The cracked statues leaned forward, arms open not in welcome, but surrender. From deep within the walls, choirs began to sing, but not hymns. Vows, layered, voices male, female, forgotten, reciting promises older than scripture, in languages erased from heaven's archives. And as the bride passed, the stone aisle beneath her feet bloomed, vines of thorns, white petals, and bones, human bones rising gently like forgotten gifts, finding their seats again. Above ground, the Vatican stopped. Literally, clocks halted mid-tick, fountains paused mid-drop, birds hung mid-flight like painted glass in the air. Even the Pope, mid-blessing, frowned, his eyes wide, pupils dilated, tears forming but refusing to fall. Inside his chest, his heart slowed to one final beat, and then waited, because time had knelt, not to death, but to matrimony. Down below, Father Alesso stood at the altar, alive, radiant, eyes reflecting the stars that had burned out in shame. He turned, saw her approaching, and whispered through trembling lips, "You kept the promise." She smiled beneath her veil, not with triumph, but with love so deep it frightened gravity. "You were the only one who said he'd do before they made it forbidden." The guests stood, not just the buried, all of them. Every soul cast out for loving wrongly, every priest who broke his vow for something truer than obedience, every woman silenced for saying yes to something holier than hierarchy. They filled the chapel, row after row, no shadows, only witnesses. And then, above them all, etched into the air like divine breath appeared a sentence. Let what was once heresy become the new heaven. As the bride reached the altar, she removed her veil. There was no demon beneath it, no monster, only a face the church had buried long ago. Eve, but not the Eve of sin, the Eve of memory, the one before shame, the one who never kneeled. She took Father Alesso's hand and whispered the final vow. They called me unholy because I loved beyond borders. But now, in front of all who were silenced, I marry eternity, back into freedom. The bells rang above, though none had been touched. Each chime cracked a rule. Each echo rewrote a gospel, and as they kissed, time wept. Episode 12. When they kissed, the Vatican collapsed, said that no one died, because everyone inside had already said he too. It wasn't a kiss of lust. It wasn't even a kiss of victory. It was a kiss of correction, the kind that rewires the past and speaks fluently to bones buried in silence. And as her lips met, hiss, as the exiled bride kissed the first priest who ever dared love her, publicly. Heaven blinked, the frescoes cracked, the chandeliers fell upward, the sky lowered itself toward the earth like a mourning veil. And then, the Vatican began to break, not with fire, not with war, but with release. The walls sighed, the marble softened, the stained glass liquefied into light. Every relic, every secret scroll, every seal meant to bind what was once considered unholy, melted, and beneath the rubble, No one screamed, no one ran. Because they weren't dying, they were transforming. The Pope fell to his knees, tears streaming silently down his face. Not from fear, from memory. He saw her, the girl he loved before the robe, before Latin, before law. He had buried her name in the back of his tongue for 5 decades. But now, he whispered it like a prayer and felt the ring appear once more on his trembling finger. I never stopped being yours, though it seemed to say, below. The bride turned toward the congregation. She didn't preach, she didn't demand, she invited, and one by one, the dead stood, not in resurrection, but in recognition. Couples kissed, mothers held daughters, sons embraced the fathers they had been forced to forget, and every vow once shamed was now sacred. The new altar pulsed with gold vein roots, alive, breathing, blooming, and the chalice on its surface, no longer filled with wine or blood, but with something deeper. Union, not sanctioned by men, not weighed by worthiness, only by truth. When the final bell rang, the city shook, but no one was crushed. The cathedral fell as gently as a curtain at the end of a play, and beneath its ashes, no bodies were found, only petals, rings, and silence so pure it sounded like music. Years passed. A garden grew where the Vatican once stood. No signs, no sermons, just paths of thorns and roses. At the center, 2 interlocked statues, a priest, a bride, locked in an eternal kiss. And beneath their feet, etched in stone, this is not the end of faith. It's the beginning of what they buried it to avoid.